uh, by thanking all of you, not only for being here tonight. This is a phenomenal turnout. But thank you for the extraordinary work you do every single day. Sometimes we take you for granted. We shouldn't. You're doing a great job, and thank you for that. I also want to thank the Post Office. This meeting was originally scheduled for December 18th. That was a very bad time. I appreciate your rescheduling the meeting to a more convenient and appropriate time. Now, let me begin by picking up on a point that the Governor and Senator Leahy have already made. We are in the midst of the worst recession since the Great Depression. 25 million Americans are either unemployed or underemployed. On the floor of the Senate and the House, Senator Leahy, Congressman Welch, and I are doing everything we can to try, and I got to tell you against very strong opposition, to try to create the millions of jobs our economy needs. We are also trying to make sure that our veterans get the jobs that they are entitled to. In the midst of all of that, it is patently insane to be talking about throwing 100,000 Americans out of work. The Post Office has made a case which is certainly true. This is the 21st century. Many of us use email. We know that there must be changes in the Postal Service. But in my view, if the Postal Service does the right thing, and in Congress, Senator Leahy, Congressman Welch and I are working on legislation to do that, there are business models available to grow the Postal Service rather than cutting, and cutting. Now, this is the business model of Mr. Donahue, Postmaster General Donahue, and the Postal Service right now. They want to eliminate 252 processing plants, or they're looking at that, including the one here in White River Junction. They want to shut down thousands of rural post offices, which in many parts of our country and our state are the centers of town. It's where people come together, including 15 in the state of Vermont. They want to eliminate Saturday delivery. Now, when you do all of that, in my view, when you do, as the Post Office indicated, slow down mail delivery, so when I put a piece in the mailbox, it may get to the destination in 2 days, 3 days, maybe even 5 days, when older people will be delayed in getting their prescription drugs. When you begin to do that, you are in the start of a death cycle, a death spiral for the Post Office. Because who is going to use the Post Office if its strongest attribute of speedy delivery no longer exists? Now, one of the things that Senator Leahy and Congressman Welch and I have worked on with some success is that I had a very strong fear that what the Post Office wanted to do is ramrod these cuts before Congress could act. So no matter what legislation may be out there, it doesn't matter if Congress doesn't have the time to deliberate and deal with comprehensive legislation. We met with Postmaster General Donahue a few weeks ago. We had a very long meeting. I wanted a 6-month moratorium on cuts. We agreed to a 5-month moratorium. The importance of that is that when we return to Washington in January, at the end of January, one of the first orders of business up in the Senate will be comprehensive postal reform. Now, what has disappointed me about the postal presentation, and I really have a hard time understanding it, it is absolutely true that first-class mail service is down. No one denies that. But one of the great financials facing the post office, in addition to the decline in first-class mail, in addition to the recession, is the absolutely unfair and onerous financial requirements being made on the Postal Service. And it's very hard for me to understand how in a presentation this is not dealt with. The Postal Service, as a result, not their fault, as a result of congressional action some years ago, is required to come up with about $5.5 billion every single year for future health care retirees. There is no other agency of government that comes close to having this requirement, and as best we can understand, there is no corporation or company in America that has to do that. Now, I talked recently to the gentleman who is head of the Office of Personnel Management, and he agreed that this is an onerous and unnecessary requirement. There is already enough money in the future retiree health benefit program to pay out benefits for the next 20 years. The Post Office does not need to come up with $5.5 billion. That number can be very significantly reduced, and that is in part of the legislation that Senator Leahy, Congressman Welch, and I are working on. Will that solve all the problems? Good start. Second of all, the Postal Service has overpaid the federal employee retirement system, and it is now agreed upon over $11 billion. If the Post Office can recoup that money, cuts in what they have to pay to retiree health benefits, that will come close to giving the Postal Service the $20 billion they need in the next 4 or 5 years to reach the kind of solvency that they're talking about. In addition to that, on the House side, Congressman Welch is on board legislation which would provide that $55 billion in overpayment made to the civil service retirement system be returned to the Post Office as well. So the point is, here's the point. Does the Postal Service have to change? The answer is yes. But we also have to be fair to the Postal Service and not place burdens on them that no other agency of government has or no other private sector company has. So we have to short-term focus on these accounting issues to give the Postal Service the 3, 4, 5 years that it needs to begin the kind of reorganization. Now, the business model that the Post Office is talking about now is basically cut, cut, cut. I disagree with that approach. We need a new approach. But the new approach must be an entrepreneurial approach, an approach of growth, an approach of being aggressive in the business community. For example, right now, I'll give you some examples of this. Right now, I walk into a post office and I say to the clerk, can you notarize this letter for me? You know what the clerk says? It is against the law for me to notarize that letter. It's against the law. If I say to the clerk, oh, by the way, can you give me 10 copies of this letter? Can't do it. Post office not allowed to do that, is not doing that today. If I'm in a rural post office and I go in and I say, oh, by the way, can you sell me a fishing license or a hunting license? Can't do that. It's against the law. So I think if we get some smart people together to understand that we have letter carriers knocking on 160 million doors every single day, that we have infrastructure all over this country. If we sit down and say, how can the post office work with other government agencies? How can the post office be more aggressive with the private sector in generating more business? I think we can come up with a solution that is a lot more positive than the cut, cut, cut that the post office is now bringing forth. To the